On this day in 2007, United States Air Force nuclear weapons incident, 6 U.S. cruise missiles armed with nuclear warheads are flown without proper authorization from Minot Air Force Base to Barksdale Air Force Base. Up in Minot in North Dakota, they're installing 2 pylons mounted with cruise missiles up under the wings of a B-52H heavy bomber, 1 pylon with 3 cruise missiles under each of the 2 wings. To prepare these cruise missiles for transport, procedure calls for live nuclear warheads to be removed and replaced with dummy warheads. The mission is for training purposes only, not nuclear war, but for some reason the airmen detailed to the breakout crew install these pylons, attach them to wings of the B-52 with 6 fully armed, locked and loaded variable yield nuclear warheads. The aircraft is left parked on the runway at Minot overnight, unguarded, then the next morning flown to Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana and parked on a runway for another 12 hours. Altogether, 6 nuclear warheads mishandled and unaccounted for or improperly secured for approximately 36 hours. The incident reported to the Department of Defense is referred to by observers as a bent spear incident, which indicates a nuclear weapon incident that is of significant concern but does not involve the immediate threat of nuclear war. 4 top USAF commanders are relieved, numerous other personnel reassigned or decertified, and Minot suspended from nuclear weapons operations. Nobel Peace Prize laureate Joseph Rotblat writes, "If the militarily most powerful and least threatened states need nuclear weapons for their security, how can one deny such security to countries that are truly insecure?" From Rutland, Vermont, this is Richard Alcott speaking.
Let's tell people what we do know. It was last Thursday, a B-52 bomber loaded 6 air-launched cruise missiles under its wings, took off from Minot, North Dakota, flew the length of the United States to Barksdale, Louisiana. Those missiles were supposed to be decommissioned. There was just one little problem. When they landed in Louisiana, they found that those missiles that were supposed to be basically decommissioned and taken out of service, each of them had a nuclear warhead on them. 6 nuclear warheads flying the length of the United States, and no one seemed to know it. To say the least, a major investigation is underway now. The Air Force officer in charge of the squadron loading the munitions, relieved of duty. They took an immediate inventory of all Air Force nuclear weapons to make sure they had everything. They say the public was never in any danger. The weapons were not armed, that there would have been no nuclear detonation if in some fashion the missiles had basically fallen off the wings of the airplane. But really, small comfort to most of the military and to many Americans, perhaps. This sort of thing is not supposed to happen. Nuclear weapons are the most guarded, the most secure item, supposedly, in the U.S. military arsenal. One military official telling us today, this is unprecedented. Nobody remembers another instance like this.
Charles Osman has both a background in nuclear energy, weaponry, and as a futurist has a thought on this. Okay, and so I look forward to hearing him on it in just a minute. Coming up after the top of the hour, Chris Moon will be on, and we'll be talking about ghosts as we approach Halloween, and we'll get the latest from Haunting Times just after the top of the hour. So you were saying there then, Charles, that this was unusual. The protocol is these guys are walking around with weapons, and this was even before we were supposedly on high alert after 9/11.
This is since like the late 50s. This is how that procedure works.
Right.
I was involved with this stuff in the early 80s, and I should make that point clear. But unless protocols change drastically, and I simply can't imagine it would, the usual procedure is, when you're in a situation where you have nuclear weapons or other high priority ordnance, and there's other things that would fall in the same category, you are allowed a specific time, a specific access code or permission, as it were. You have to have the appropriate people give you that permission in advance. You go to where the thing is. You work with somebody else. At all times, there are armed guards standing right there. I mean, right there in your face. It's not like off in the distance. These guys are right there. If for any reason you deviate from the prescribed procedure, if one of the people disappears all of a sudden, or anybody starts acting weird, right away you're going to get a bunch of guys with automatic weapons. They're going to tell you, get on the ground, face to the floor. And you do what they say. Because if you don't, they'll pull the trigger and you'll be filled with bullets.
Okay.
They're not only authorized, they are required by law. That's the only reason they're there, and that's what they are ordered to do. In
Right.
all cases, when you're on a base with this kind of ordinance, that's the procedure. Number two, these types of ordinances come in pieces. They're not just sitting there like in a box. They have to actually be assembled. And I won't specify exactly why or how, but certain parts decay over time. They have to be replaced or updated. There's a very specific maintenance procedure. That's why they have these kind of protocols in the first place. But to even get near a building where this stuff is stored, to get from one piece of equipment to another to make the assembly possible, that requires a whole set of protocols in itself. Then you have to go from that to actually attaching it to the delivery mechanism, in this case, this stealth cruise missile. And then you have to actually have authorization to get from that to some kind of transport mechanism.
Okay.
When it goes on a plane, a whole other set of procedure goes. You have to file a flight plan. You have to clear transfer of nuclear weapons, which is a very, very serious. I mean, that's as high as priority as it gets, especially if you're flying over civilian territory. I mean, the number of different procedures involved are very complex, and for a very good reason. When the plane goes in the air, if that plane deviates even slightly off a flight plan, or if anything funny comes up, any dots appear near it on the radar screen, I mean, within seconds, you're going to have a squadron of fighter jets up in the air, and they're going to be flying at that thing, and they're going to be fully armed and ready to shoot it down if necessary.
Okay.
That's how this stuff is done. So, for me, to hear that, oh, well, we threw some bombs on a plane, and they happen to show up at this other Air Force base, no, I'm not buying it. Sorry. I mean, I know the Air Force has made all this noise, and they, can all these guys and everything, but from what I've seen, from what I personally witnessed, it doesn't work that way.
All right, well, let's back up for a second, because the last figure I heard was 70. Was that about what you heard? You've been following the story.
That's the current news report.
70 people have been reassigned.
Yeah, well, that's here nor there, because if they've been reassigned, that doesn't really mean a lot. It just means...
Okay, well, but hold on a second. Okay. 70 people disciplined, 70 people getting a letter in their jacket, 70 people getting something. Okay, so, I mean, doesn't that indicate right there a systemic failure?
You're talking... It does indicate a potential for systemic failure, and I think there was one made on purpose. That's where I'm going with this.
And we'll get to that. But I mean, you said that all of these people, all of these things would have to go wrong. The planets would have to line up just wrong for something like this to happen. Yeah. And I'm thinking 70 people reassigned. Yeah. That sounds like the planets lining up just wrong. That sounds like a lot of people falling asleep, taking this thing for granted. Yep. Not really paying attention, not looking at the clipboards, no longer caring who does what. Maybe, we all know guys in the military, and I was just talking to somebody today who spent a lot of time in the Marines, and he was talking about guys he knew in the Marines that were tying their arms off with rubber tubes in the barracks. There's a lot of pot smoking going on. I mean, who knows what could have happened?
But on the Air Force, the standards are very, very high. To even get into the Air Force, it's a little bit different than getting into Marines. I'm not in any way casting dispersions on the Marines. I'm just saying that's a very technically specific kind of requirement to get into this thing.
Okay.
And when you go through background checks and all that, I mean, look, this was in the 80s when I was involved in this kind of stuff. So
I understand.
Things have really degraded over time? I don't know. But I'm just saying, from what I know, I just can't imagine this happening. Now, the pilots who flew the B-52, they claimed that they didn't know that things were live. And I can actually understand that. That might be believable. But the whole procedure to getting the stuff assembled and actually attached to the plane, ready to fly, that part, I just scratched my head. I was thinking, wait a minute, something's really wrong with this picture. Now, let's just presuppose for a moment it was a gigantic accident. But let's presuppose that maybe there was somebody who wanted to test the system or perhaps furthermore see if something could be, tried.
Right, a prankster.
Okay, now, look, here's what I find so fascinating. First, somebody said it was 5. Then somebody said it was 6. Then we're back to 5, and then we're back to 6, and now they're not saying how many. I kind of have a problem with that.
I mean, in terms of the number of nukes?
Yes, exactly right.
Okay.
Now, here's why I have a problem. This was a W-80 warhead. You can look this on the web yourself if you wish. The W-80 is a very unusual piece of hardware. Let me explain why. It's a variable yield warhead. What that means is it can be tuned to go anywhere from, say, 5 kilotons, which is like a really small device, actually, to something about the size of the Hiroshima bomb. Now, just think for a moment. Why would that be interesting? And first and second of all, this is a very small device, about the size of a small wastebasket. It's something you can actually carry in your hand. And you think, okay, why is that relevant? Well, hold that thought in your mind. Just imagine. I'm just going to offer a scenario. You can laugh and call it crazy, but just think about it for a minute. Let's say this all dies away, and everybody's back to looking at Paris Hilton or, I don't know, whatever the latest fashion trend is, or some new sex scandal, whatever the things. Okay, so fine, 3 weeks from now, suddenly at 4 o'clock in the morning, headlines burst open. Matt Drudge has it on his headlines. A mushroom cloud appears somewhere. It could be anywhere. It could be Guam. Or it could be Philippines. Just somewhere.
Okay.
And mixed into the headlines, you see the words Iran, terrorist, Al-Qaeda, maybe, Pakistan or something, mixing together with U.S. base and casualties. What do you suppose the reaction would be?
Well, I mean, we all know that you could do that as being, a precursor to we have to stop them. Look what they're doing already. Now we have to invade. I mean, there'd be plenty of there's already saber rattling about Iran.
Wait. Remember now, 3 carrier groups in full readiness, submarines, bulging to the max. We've already been to DEFCON 2 status and went back down just as sort of a trial run. That's right now. That's today. We have 1,700 targets already defined in Iran, ready to go. It's closer than people might realize. And this is not classified stuff. This is all public knowledge. But, the point is, we're sort of on the edge now. And many people have said, including people like Wolfowitz and others, who have already said, look, we're ready to go. All we need is a little bit of encouragement to sort of get past that next square. I just hold that thought for a moment. And Now we have a second look at what Russia's up to. And this is kind of why I'm so concerned. If it was just Iran, if all we were supposed to do was go in, neutralize Iran, and kind of say, okay, we're done. But I don't think that's really what the larger picture is, if I could be so bold. Because, think about this for a moment. If you go backwards in time, back to the early 80s, when the Russians were ending up in Afghanistan, and we kind of got them out of there by Armenian Mujahideen, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, it was right around that same time. They were trying to contest us, and we were getting the first Star Wars program, and they realized they really couldn't do both at once. They couldn't, sort of do battle with us and at the same time keep their space program going and at the same time, sort of outdo us with Star Wars. And they kind of knew that the end was coming around the corner. So it was really an economic failure driven by a combination of those things. So we fast forward. We eventually see the dissolution of the Soviet Empire. They give up all their eastern territories. Those eastern territories are now being occupied by us. We're now pressuring at this very minute to put our missiles into what had been their territories, aimed at them. Meanwhile, they have their guys in Iran. They've been building nuclear facilities. They've already worked out a deal with Iran. And see, it gets more complicated because you realize they've got pipeline deals in the wake. They want to have, clear water ports. The whole thing kind of hinges on they want, in a sense, to replicate what they had lost in the past. And we're now in their face. We are now occupying the very territories that they had once tried to occupy themselves. Plus, they've lost all their older territories, and they now are looking at our missiles aimed at them. So in a way, if we were to go into Iran and really push this thing to its limit, it's not just an attack on Iran, it's by proxy an affront to Russia. And a lot of folks in the Pentagon know this. A lot of very smart people all over the world know this. In fact, the American populace is probably the only folks who probably really don't understand this, at least in the current moment. That's why I'm so concerned.
Well, I don't help me with that connection. What you're saying then that this is what would lead to some sort of World War III scenario with Russia?
I think what would happen is you would have a limited sort of a tit for tat. We'd go in, do our strike on Iran, try to neutralize their so-called nuclear sites and so forth. And I'm not saying that Iran's a good guy. I do understand we should probably try to deal with them, but this may not be the best way to deal with it. And what I'm saying is if we go in there with guns blazing, with all-out frontal attack, Russia's going to be forced to respond in some way.
Okay, so you're saying Russia will do what?
Well, they might, just for show, do a little bit of saber rattling, maybe even detonate something just to kind of say, look, we're serious, don't go any further.
Detonate a what?
Maybe a small tactical nuke just to kind of show that we mean business. And we'll have to do something like that the same to kind of show that we mean business. And then everybody's going to hold their breath and say, wait a minute, let's not go any further. Let's all sit down and look at this some more. But once you cross that line, there's a whole bunch of other folks in the same picture. You've got Pakistan in the background. You've got the Pakistan, say, India fight over Kashmir. And remember, India and Pakistan went to DEFCON 2 status not that long ago. They were already set to go, and everybody sort of made them calm down a little bit, but only temporarily. There's a whole bunch of other folks who are waiting for their chance to see the world distracted by other chaos so that they can initiate their own little tit-for-tat. In other words, it may not be just us versus them. It may be a collection of different folks that all jump in at the same time to settle their own scores. It gets out of control. At that point, that's where things get dangerous.
Okay. I think it's dangerous anytime, long before that. Theoretically, if if we are setting up some sort of, as you're about to claim, our government is going to do a false flag operation
Yeah, exactly right.
I mean, that's plenty dangerous long before the gets to other people opening up the doors to their nuclear arsenals. So, I mean, what's your timeline for this then? I mean, let's assume you're right that this was.
First of all,
hold on. Let's just assume you're right that this is that you've got this missing nuke that comes from Minot to Barksdale. That this nuke was intentionally set up. Air Force was in on it. They established, a way which they could siphon off a nuke in this sort of complicated scenario. I mean, it seems to me if they're going to do it, why not just open up the back door, take one out? I mean, if it's an Air Force operation at a high level, why not? But that having been said, they're going to set one off somewhere and then blame Iran and then use that as an entree to invade Iran. How many weeks are we talking about before something like that would happen?
But here's how I look at this. And in order to really get a handle on this, are you familiar, by the way, with the program for the New American Century, or PNAC as it's called? Because this really kind of explains a lot of the motivations. PNAC is something that's been in the works for 25 years. And it's really Cheney and Wolfowitz and Pearl and this whole collection of guys who've known each other for many years. They crafted this document a long time ago, back in Carter's time actually was the beginning edge of this, but all through Reagan's time they kind of perfected the concept. When Clinton took office, they tried to get him to sort of go along with the idea. He said, "No, I don't like this. This is not a good idea. The whole thing about going into Iraq, setting up bases, and then going to Iran, etc. This has all been sort of worked out. It's a very complicated plan, but it's been put on paper for many years. And in fact, if you read that PNAC doctrine, by the way, it actually says, in so many words, it would take a Pearl Harbor-like event to instigate the American populace to okay such a thing. It's a long story, but for those that want to research this, they can read the same documents. Fine. So now we're at this current moment. And they know that once the elections go through in 2008, their time's over. They're going to be out of office. They're going to be out of power. This is their last shot to see their 25-plus-year plan go into practice. And if they don't get it done now, it's not going to happen. So I'm saying within a matter of weeks, a month or so at most, something's going to happen that's going to say, look, we're on the edge of going into Iran. We've got everything primed. We've got all of our guys there. We're ready to go. Let's just have a little nudge, nothing too serious, nothing too horrible, but just enough to kind of get people excited. A mushroom cloud appears somewhere, and presto, we get to go in. But
why is that nothing too horrible? I mean, when you say nothing too horrible, and you're talking about a nuclear weapon, that's where we've gone to war for a lot less than that.
This is a tunable. So, in other words, a 5-kiloton device. I mean, that's horrible. I'm not trying to downplay this, but a 5-kiloton device, if it was made that small, it would make a big bang. It'd make a mushroom cloud. It would make a sizable crater, but it wouldn't be anything near as horrible as, say, Hiroshima, which is about 10,000 kilotons. In other words, you can kind of, because of variable yield, you can make it small or large, depending on what the application is. And I think that's why this was chosen.
Okay, so why not just take one out the back door? Why all of this stuff that brings attention to it? Because
these kinds of materials are extremely well tracked and traced. I mean, the inventory is looked at like nobody's business. You can't go near the stuff without all kinds of clearances. Every piece of the inventory is tracked. At every hour of the day, they can tell exactly where they are, where they've been, where they're going. The amount of effort that's spent on keeping reference to these things, in fact, where they're stored, and I won't go into too much, but they have electronics on the devices, the electronics in the buildings, they can track, the minute these things are moved, they know where they've gone. It's like a GPS, but on steroids. They can track everything. So they'd have to come up with a way to have something kind of, drop off the records, as it were, that would not be through the normal way that these things are accounted for.
I guess what I'm saying is, why not have something drop off the records by, say, deleting its existence ever in a computer program, using DIA to create a scenario for why it's not really missing. Why do something that attracts international attention?
Because maybe it's already been missing, and this is a way to cover that up.
Okay. All right. And where do you suppose, if this is going to happen in the next month or so, where do you suppose, Charles Osman, that this tactical nuclear weapon might get used?
It's just an idea.
I understand. I'm just trying to get an idea.
Yeah,
where would it...
But it could be anywhere, and that's the whole point. It doesn't have to be like an American city or something. A lot of people think, it has to be some horrible thing where it blows up in New York. No, not at all. Just a nuclear anything going off, like in Guam or the Philippines, or just somewhere where there's an American base or an American interest would be enough to get the attention. it would be enough to make the headlines go, okay, we get it, let's go. That's really what's required.
So you're thinking that we would blow it up, but in a lightly populated area to blame it on Iran,
or something to do with Iran? Yes, of course. Or something with Al-Qaeda, via Iran. I mean, whatever the scenario is, it would be enough to get people to say, okay, let's go there, because people are kind of reactionary, and especially here in this country. I'm sorry to say in a very gentle way, a lot of folks don't really study this stuff all that carefully, and as long as they saw a mushroom cloud and the right kind of headlines, everybody would go, it'd be the way to get everybody in line.
What do we think Russia's capability is these days in terms of tracking our nuclear weapons?
Well, everybody tracks everybody's stuff, and one thing that should be added, just to make sure that the technology is understood, all nuclear devices have their own signature. In other words, when something blows up, we know right away. We can, not just because of seismic waves, but we can also get a spectrographical analysis of the actual debris of their blast, as it were, and we can tell who made what. I mean, it's pretty easy. But at the moment the stuff goes off, nobody's going to care particularly. It's going to be something went off and let's go in. Maybe weeks later, maybe a few months later, the report comes out, oh, by the way, it wasn't a Russian device or it wasn't an Iranian device or whatever. But in other words, at the moment the thing happens, nobody's going to notice.
Okay, so but you're saying is within a few weeks' time, the signature may be measured by the Russians, may be registered by the UN, or somebody's going to be able to tell that was an American nuclear weapon that went off. And why do we not think we wouldn't be immediately accused of a false flag operation?
Well, I mean, a couple of things that can be said. If one wanted to make it look like something else, it could be. We could flavor it to look like something else. And number two, this would be one of those things that we debated for months and months, and it would be, this group of scientists claims this, and that group of scientists claims that. And it would be, I'll give you an example. I mean, for instance, when 9/11 happened, it took...
We have 30 seconds. Go ahead.
Okay. When 9/11 happened, it took years for the final scientific reports to come in about what exactly happened in those buildings. And to this very day, there's still controversy. NIST just released a report that said they can't really explain exactly why the buildings imploded. I'm just, as a reference point, 6 years after it happened, there's still argument about exactly what it was they saw. So something like this could be very similar. Could take years to settle that argument.
Well, then, that's what we'll keep an eye on in the next month or so time. That's Charles Osman's proposal on that so-called missing nuke. He says, yes, it is missing, that there were 6, now that there were 5, and that we can look for it sometime to be used in the weeks ahead as a false flag operation to justify an invasion of Iran. And we'll keep an eye on that, and we'll get back to that. Otherwise, it's Halloween coming up in a week. We'll do a little